My name is Margaret, and at 40 years old, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I was wrong, but we'll get to that later. I've always been the type of person who thrives on social connections. My job as a human resources manager at a large company kept me busy during the day, but my evenings and weekends were filled with friends, acquaintances, and various activities. One person who was a constant in my life was Tom, a colleague from work. He was sweet, attentive, and had been subtly courting me for years. The problem? I found him indecisive, lacking that spark I was looking for in a partner. Still, we got along great as friends. We'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing: work, gossip, our shared love of obscure documentaries, the latest book we both read. It was comfortable, easy, but that's all it was. "You know Margaret," Tom said one evening as we sat in our favorite coffee shop. "I've been thinking." I cut him off gently. "Tom, you're a great friend. Let's not complicate that, okay?" He nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face, before he launched into a story about his nephew's latest antics. That was our routine, and I was content with it. I had my job, my friends, and my independence. Marriage had never been a priority for me, and at 40, I figured if it happened, great. If not, I was happy with my life as it was. Little did I know that everything was about to change. It started innocently enough. I decided to shake things up a bit and enrolled in a salsa class at a local studio. I figured it would be a fun way to stay active and maybe meet some new people. On the first night of class, I arrived early, nervous energy thrumming through me as I stretched at the bar. The door opened, and in walked the most gorgeous man I'd ever seen. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. And boy, did he smile when he saw me. "Hi there," he said, walking over. "I'm Jason. Is this your first class too?" I nodded, suddenly feeling like a tongue-tied teenager. "Yeah, I'm Margaret. Nice to meet you." As we chatted before class, I learned that Jason worked as a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. He was charming, confident, and made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. When the instructor paired us up for the first dance, I felt a jolt of electricity as Jason's hand found my waist. As we moved together, stumbling and laughing, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. After class, Jason asked me out for a drink, and I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. "You know," Jason said, leaning in close, "I'm really glad I decided to take this class." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine. "Me too, Jason, me too." As I drove home that night, my head was spinning. I'd gone to that dance class expecting to learn some new moves. Instead, I'd met someone who made me feel things I thought I'd long since outgrown. The next 6 months were a blur of dancing, laughter, and stolen kisses. Jason and I fell hard and fast for each other. Every moment with him felt electric. "Margaret," Jason said one evening as we strolled through the park, hand in hand, "I know this might seem fast, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. Will you marry me?" My heart skipped a beat. At 40, I'd long since given up on the idea of marriage, but with Jason, everything felt different, possible, exciting. "Yes," I breathed, barely believing the words coming out of my mouth. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding was a whirlwind affair. I was floating on cloud 9, convinced that all my dreams had finally come true. As I walked down the aisle, I caught sight of Tom, my work colleague. His face was a mixture of shock and disappointment, but I pushed the thought aside. This was my day, my happiness. After the ceremony, Tom approached me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Congratulations, Margaret." I'm happy for you." I could see the hurt behind his words, but I chose to keep things light. "Thanks, Tom. Hey, don't worry. I'm sure you'll find someone special soon enough." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Still, I was too caught up in my own joy to dwell on it. After the wedding, Jason moved into my large house, the one I'd inherited from my parents. It felt right, like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "What do you think about kids?" I asked Jason one night as we lay in bed, basking in newlywed bliss. Jason's face clouded over slightly. "Honey, we're not exactly spring chickens anymore. Don't you think we're a bit past that stage?" I considered his words. At 40, having children hadn't been at the forefront of my mind, but now with Jason, the idea had a certain appeal. Still, I didn't want to rock the boat so early in our marriage. "You're probably right," I conceded. "We have each other. That's enough." The first year of our marriage was everything I dreamed of and more. Jason was attentive, loving, and seemed to anticipate my every need. We traveled, we entertained, and we built a life together that felt perfect. But as we approached our first anniversary, I began to notice subtle changes in Jason's behavior. His moods became unpredictable. Some days he was the sweet, charming man I'd fallen in love with. Other days he was irritable and distant. "Jason, is everything okay?" I asked one evening after he'd snapped at me over something trivial. He rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly tired. "I'm fine, Margaret, just stressed about work." "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. As the weeks went by, Jason's mood swings became more pronounced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. "I think you should see a doctor," I finally said one night. "These mood swings, they are not normal, Jason." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Maybe you're right. I'll make an appointment." As I watched Jason pick up the phone to call his doctor friend, I couldn't shake the feeling that our perfect life was about to change dramatically. But I pushed the thought aside. We were in this together, for better or for worse. Whatever was happening, we'd face it as a team, or so I thought. As Jason began his treatment with his doctor friend, I tried to be as supportive as possible. I wanted to accompany him to his appointments, to be there for him every step of the way. But Jason was adamant about going alone. "It's easier for me this way, Margaret," he'd say, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I appreciate your support, but I need to do this on my own." I respected his wishes, even though it pained me to be shut out. After one particular appointment, Jason came home looking more defeated than usual. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. Jason sighed heavily. "The insurance, it doesn't cover everything. The treatment costs are higher than we thought." My heart sank. We've been doing well financially, but medical bills had a way of piling up quickly. Without hesitation, I made a decision. "We'll figure it out," I assured him. "I have some savings. We can use that for your treatment." He pulled me into a tight hug, and I felt his body relax against mine. At that moment, I was certain I'd made the right choice. But as time went on, doubts began to creep in. Despite the expensive treatments, Jason's condition seemed to be worsening. He became forgetful, sometimes leaving the house and getting lost. Valuable items started disappearing from our home. One day, I noticed my grandmother's jewelry was missing. It was a family heirloom, precious not just for its monetary value, but for the memories it held. "Jason," I approached him carefully, "have you seen Grandma's jewelry?" "I can't find it anywhere." He looked at me blankly. "Jewelry?" "I don't remember," Jason said, his confused expression breaking my heart a little. Was this the early stages of Alzheimer's or some form of dementia? The thought terrified me. Maybe we should try a different doctor, I suggested gently. A specialist, perhaps. But Jason was adamant. No, I trust Dr. Anderson. He knows what he's doing. I didn't push the issue, but worry gnawed at me constantly. I found myself confiding in Tom more and more at work. It's just, I'm so tired, Tom, I admitted one day over lunch. I don't know what to do anymore. Tom's brow furrowed with concern. Margaret, don't you think this is all a bit suspicious? Maybe you should have someone keep an eye on Jason when you're not around. I left the conversation feeling angry and hurt. From that day on, I stopped sharing my feelings with Tom. He clearly didn't understand what Jason and I were going through. As months passed, things only got worse. Jason had to quit his job, and his doctor forbade him from driving. I became the sole breadwinner, juggling work, and taking care of Jason. Despite the strain, I still loved him deeply. I'd take him out to restaurants or shopping for new clothes, always trying to bring a smile to his face. "Oh, I like this shirt," Jason would say, holding up an expensive designer piece. "Honey, that's a bit pricey," I gently pointed out. His face would crumple like a child's. "But I really want it, Margaret, please." More often than not, I'd give in. Seeing him happy, even for a moment, made it all worth it. 2 years into our marriage, I had an idea. What if we bought a house in the country? I suggested to Jason. The fresh air might do you good, and we could rent it out for extra income. Jason's eyes lit up at the idea, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with. Excited, I went to check our accounts, ready to start house hunting. What I found made my blood run cold. Our savings were gone, every last penny. In a panic, I called the bank. "There must be some mistake," I insisted. "I think we've been robbed." The bank employee's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but the transfers were all made from your mobile app. The money was withdrawn using your card at various ATMs. With shaking hands, I approached Jason, who was lunging on the couch, seeming oblivious to my distress. "Jason," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just got off the phone with the bank. All our savings are gone. Did you withdraw any money recently?" Jason's face scrunched up in confusion. "Money? I remember, Margaret. You know how my memory's been lately." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I think I need to go to the police. Someone's been making our money, and we need to find out who." The moment the words left my mouth, everything changed. Jason's confused expression vanished, replaced by one of panic. Suddenly, he fell to the floor, his body convulsing violently. "Jason," I cried out, rushing to his side. His arms and legs were flailing, his head banging against the floor. I was terrified, torn between trying to help him and calling for an ambulance. Just as abruptly as it started, the seizure stopped. Jason lay still, panting heavily. "Hospital," I said, reaching for my phone. "We need to get you to a hospital right away." "No," Jason's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "No hospital. I just need to rest. Please, Margaret." His eyes, wide and pleading, bore into mine. Against my better judgment, I relented. "Okay," I said softly. "But if this happens again, we're going to the emergency room." No arguments. Jason nodded weakly, allowing me to help him onto the couch. For the rest of the evening, I hovered nearby, catering to his every need. He asked for his favorite meal, wanted the TV on a specific channel, and needed extra pillows, and I complied with each request, my earlier suspicions momentarily forgotten in the face of his apparent fragility. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As Jason dozed on the couch, I retreated to our bedroom, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and worry. Almost without thinking, I found myself dialing Tom's number. "Margaret?" Tom's voice was thick with sleep. "Is everything okay?" The concern in his tone broke something inside me. Before I knew it, I was pouring out the whole story. The missing money, Jason's reaction, the terrifying seizure. Tom listened silently until I finished. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Margaret, I hate to say this, but don't you think this all seems a bit suspicious?" I opened my mouth to protest, to defend Jason as I had so many times before, but this time the words wouldn't come. Deep down, a part of me was starting to wonder the same thing. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I had just settled into my office, my mind still reeling from the events of the previous night, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled me to answer. "Margaret? It's Sarah, your old classmate from high school. I work as an administrator at St. Mary's Hospital now. You need to come here right away." My heart leaped into my throat. "Sarah, what's going on? Is it Jason?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, it's about your husband. The police brought him in for a medical examination. Margaret, you need to get here as soon as possible." I don't remember the drive to the hospital. My mind was a blur of worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting for me at the reception, her face grave. "Margaret," she said, gripping my arm, "before you see Jason, there's something you need to know. The doctor who examined him wants to speak with you first." "But Jason," I began, looking around frantically. Sarah shook her head. "He's resting. Please talk to the doctor first. It's important." Numbly, I allowed Sarah to lead me to a small office. A middle-aged man in a white coat stood as we entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, "I'm Dr. Patel. I examined your husband when he was brought in earlier today." I nodded, unable to form words. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to listen carefully," Dr. Patel continued. "You need to contact the police immediately and report the missing money from your accounts." I blinked, confused. "But how did you?" Dr. Patel held up a hand. "When your husband was brought in, I overheard him on the phone. He was stressed that he couldn't get away with your money." The room seemed to tilt around me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Patel said gently, "after a thorough examination, I can say with certainty that your husband is not ill. I believe he's been faking his symptoms, possibly for quite some time. The medication he's been taking? Harmless placebos." I felt as if I was falling, the ground disappearing beneath my feet. All those months of worry, of care, of depleting my savings for his treatment, it had all been a lie. But his doctor, I stammered. "His friend, Dr. Anderson?" "I'm afraid," Dr. Patel said softly, "that this Dr. Anderson may be an accomplice. We've alerted the medical board, but right now, our priority is ensuring your safety and recovering your assets." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to see him," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Dr. Patel nodded to Sarah, who had been standing silently by the door. "Of course, but please contact the police first. Your husband is currently under guard, but we need to make this official." In a daze, I followed Sarah out of the office. She handed me her phone, and with trembling fingers, I dialed the police. "This is Margaret Thompson," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I need to report a theft. My husband has stolen all my savings." The moment we stepped into the room, Jason's eyes locked onto mine. For a split second, I saw a flicker of fear cross his face before he schooled his features into an expression of confusion and distress. "Margaret," he cried out, attempting to rise from the bed. "Thank God you're here. These people, they don't understand I'm sick. I need—" "Stop it, Jason," I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "It's over. I know everything." Jason's face crumpled, and then, before my eyes, his entire demeanor changed. The confused, sickly man I'd been caring for these past 2 years vanished, replaced by a stranger with cold, calculating eyes. "You stupid scum," he spat, "all pretense gone. You had no idea, did you? You were so easy to fool." I felt the officers tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I held up a hand, stopping them. I needed to hear this. "Why?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Why did you do this?" Jason laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Why? Because it was easy. You were so desperate for love, so eager to play the devoted wife. All I had to do was play sick, and you handed over everything on a silver platter." Each word was like a knife, but I stood my ground. "And Dr. Anderson, an old friend," Jason shrugged. "He got a cut of the profits for writing prescriptions and playing along. It was the perfect setup." I nodded slowly, taking it all in. Then, without another word, I turned to the officers. "I'm ready to press charges now." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, out of the hospital, and into a future I never could have imagined. The investigation revealed the full extent of Jason's deception. Not only had he stolen my savings, but he had a history of similar cons. He'd been married before, leaving his ex-wife penniless after a divorce. He'd stolen her car and a significant amount of money before disappearing. As I sat in the police station, listening to the detective recount Jason's criminal history, I felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that my suspicions hadn't been unfounded. Shame that I'd fallen for his act so completely. "Mrs. Thompson," the detective said gently, "you shouldn't blame yourself. Jason Miller, that's his real name, by the way, is a skilled con artist. He's done this before." I nodded numb, still processing the information. "And Dr. Anderson." The detective's face hardened. "We've arrested him as well. He was indeed an accomplice, providing fake medical documents and prescribing placebos to support Jason's act. He's facing charges of his own." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I needed to do next. "I want to press charges," I said firmly, "against both of them. And I want a divorce." The detective nodded approvingly. "That's a brave decision, Mrs. Thompson. We'll do everything we can to help you through this process." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I filed for divorce, pressing charges against Jason for fraud and theft. I'd also filed a claim for moral damages, the emotional toll of his deception weighing heavily on me. Throughout it all, Tom was my rock. He accompanied me to court dates, held my hand through difficult testimonies, and provided a shoulder to cry on when it all became too much. As the trial progressed, more details of Jason's scheme came to light. The prosecution was able to trace where my money had been transferred, and to my immense relief, much of it was recovered. Jason and Dr. Anderson both faced severe consequences for their actions. Jason was sentenced to several years in prison and ordered to pay substantial compensation, not just for the money he'd stolen, but for all the time I'd spent supporting him during his fake illness. Dr. Anderson was stripped of his medical license and also faced jail time. As we left the courthouse, Tom turned to me, his eyes serious. "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat at his tone. "What is it, Tom?" He took a deep breath, then said the words I never expected to hear. "I love you, Margaret. I have for years. I know this might not be the right time, but I couldn't keep it in any longer." I stood there stunned as I looked into his earnest eyes. I felt something stir in my heart, something I thought had died with Jason's betrayal. "Tom, I began, not sure how to respond. He held up a hand, smiling gently. "You don't have to say anything now. I know you're still healing. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, they'll be here." Tom's confession had caught me off guard, but as the weeks passed, I found myself looking at him in a new light. His unwavering support throughout my ordeal, his gentle patience, and his quiet strength were qualities I had always appreciated, but now they took on a new significance. One evening, as we were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same one where we used to have our after-work coffee chats, I decided to take a leap of faith. "Tom," I said, my heart racing, "I've been thinking about what you said after the trial." He looked up, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "Yes?" I took a deep breath. "I think I'm ready to give us a chance, if you still want to." The smile that broke across Tom's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Margaret, nothing would make me happier." And so we started dating. It was different from my whirlwind romance with Jason. With Tom, things moved slowly, naturally. We already knew each other so well, but discovering each other in this new context was exciting and comforting at the same time. Months passed, and our relationship deepened. Tom was everything Jason wasn't: honest, dependable, and genuinely caring. He never pushed me, always respecting my boundaries and understanding when I needed space to process my emotions. 1 year after we started dating, Tom proposed. As we planned our wedding, I couldn't help but reflect on how different everything was this time around. There was no rush, no whirlwind of emotions clouding my judgment. Instead, there was a steady, warm certainty that I was making the right choice. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear. As I walked down the aisle towards Tom, I saw in his eyes the same love and devotion I had always seen there, even when I was too blind to recognize it for what it was. After the ceremony, as we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Tom leaned in and whispered, "I've loved you for so long, Margaret. I promise to spend every day showing you how much you mean to me." I held him tighter, feeling truly safe and loved for the first time in years. "I love you too, Tom. Thank you for never giving up on me." As we swayed to the music, surrounded by our friends and family, I realized that sometimes life's greatest challenges can lead to the greatest joys. My journey had been difficult, filled with pain and betrayal, but it had led me here, to true love and happiness.